This is the end of the beginning. Welcome to today's show. If you've been listening to some of the videos I've done over the last 6 months or so, the last couple of years, but specifically the last 6 months, I've been doing more and more videos, and particularly in the last year since the Roe v. Wade, about the destruction of the way the establishment is set up, right? So to destroy everything, not just divide us and give us a national divorce, to destroy everything, they need to make people want it destroyed. So they need to make it corrupt, right? So what they're doing is they're making it look corrupt from all angles. They're telling Republicans out there that it's a two-tier system of government, right? That's the narrative we hear. Hunter Biden's not going to jail. He could cheat on his taxes. He could do things illegal with firearms. That's okay because he's Democratic, or he's a Democrat, right? We're seeing how the IRS is targeting. This is the stories that are out here. Remember, this is all mind control. So the stories about how Christians are being targeted, how conservatives are being targeted, but liberals can get away with all of this stuff, right? So it makes conservatives say, this thing's messed up. We don't want to be a part of it. It needs to be destroyed. Then they do the flip side, which this week is one of the most hilarious commentaries I've ever seen in my life. They've done the flip side. So they need to destroy the Supreme Court. They need to destroy the House, the Senate, etc., to bring about this world government. It can't exist, okay? A republic cannot exist in a world government. So they have to destroy it, but they also want the people to think it's really happening and to want it to happen, right? Because before all this nonsense, nobody had a problem with the way America was running 25 years ago, okay? Now, all of a sudden, everybody has a problem with it from both sides. And remember, they need to get both sides, not just to get the liberals all worked up about the Supreme Court rulings, which are being done on purpose, which I'll show you in a minute, but also the other side with the two-tier system. Free speech, of course, is something that we're all dealing with. Conservatives or Christians aren't allowed to speak. So being done by design, of course, this is psychological. It's about herding you the way they want to herd you and making you want what they want. Right? Problem, reaction, solution on steroids. So the Supreme Court, okay, which has to be destroyed, which we constantly are seeing the corruption of the Supreme Court now, right? How convenient. And the Roe v. Wade thing was the beginning, and I said it then. Why in the world did all of a sudden this Roe v. Wade thing come up? In this disgusting world where they're letting people read in libraries and letting kids castrate themselves, and all these people are running amok. Oh, well, we have a really good Supreme Court that suddenly wants to save the lives of babies, even though it wasn't this big issue as far as like, it's something that's been going on for 20 years now. So people are desensitized to it. So yes, we're all pro-life who listen to this channel for the most part, I'd assume, right? It wasn't like this beating issue day in and day out. The media and the government made it an issue again and brought it back in the limelight because they know that they'll be able to manipulate people using big topics, right? Like Roe v. Wade, like gay rights, like affirmative action, like the student debt thing, right? And now all of a sudden, after the Roe v. Wade, where they're saying, people are constantly talking about how we need to restructure the government, we need to get rid of the Supreme Court, we need to abolish it, right? This is what the government wants. They just need to convince you that it's what's right for the world, because if they just woke up tomorrow and said, we're getting rid of the Supreme Court, all the people, liberal and Republican, would work together and say, who are you to get rid of? They have to convince people it's corrupt, convince both sides it's corrupt, convince everyone that they need a national divorce, and then go through with what their plan is, right? And of course, that is the destruction of this country. So after that, conveniently a year later, in 1 week, we have these 3 rulings. We have all of a sudden, in a country that caters to the LGBT, which literally says if you speak against them, and I covered this on the website, where GLAAD is even saying, along with hundreds of celebrities in Hollywood, anyone who speaks online that isn't pro-LGBT, no matter what they say, needs to be removed from the internet, right? We see how catered society is to them, how all the woke communist companies are pumping out propaganda after propaganda with Pride. We even heard the government say it's no longer Pride Month, it's Pride Summer. So suddenly, of course, the Supreme Court would rule that a woman who didn't want to make wedding websites for gay couples, they ruled in her favor, of course, because as the seesaw continues, they need to get all of these people divided on each side and to want this system destroyed. So, of course, they conveniently are saying that, oh, yeah, well, if you don't like the fact that they're gay, you don't have to make them a website. And if they don't like the fact that you're Christian, they don't need to let you on their social media platform. And back and forth and back and forth. It's a giant psychological operation of destruction. So we have that this week. We have affirmative action at these corrupt Ivy League schools, which, again, this is where all the secret societies, the big ones, are running rampant, right? From Yale to Harvard. Harvard, one of the ones sticking their faces out there saying, no more affirmative action. We're not, all of a sudden, right, after all these years of having affirmative action, you don't even hear it as a topic that people care about. But now all of a sudden the Supreme Court's decided that they need race neutral and replacing affirmative action, right? So they're riling up black people now, right? And of course, they're riling up the youth, the most important thing for them in this destruction of our government and our society, empowering the youth who are completely brain dead, and saying that they're not going to allow student debt relief, even though in the first place they should never allow it because, you know, if you take out a loan, you're supposed to pay it back. It's called responsibility. I mean, the fact there's even a debate about it's unbelievable. And then they go, well, you know, we shouldn't have to pay. Well, you signed up for it, so that's, you know, whatever. That's your problem, right? But they want our tax money to pay for it. Of course, this is a way to rile up both sides, the people who paid for their education versus the young people out there who are entitled and narcissistic to think that they should have everything handed to them, which is exactly what the government has planned here, because a controlled society is one where they give them handouts, they let them live within their restrictions, and they can't travel outside of certain areas, et cetera, et cetera. So they go conveniently and they say, we're going to overthrow the student debt thing. You're not getting any relief. So look at all the topics here coming out this week and how, boy, we really need to change the Supreme Court and destroy this country.
We begin tonight with the Supreme Court striking down affirmative action and reshaping college admissions. In a 6-3 decision, the justices ruled that Harvard University and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution by considering race when deciding whether to admit someone to their school. A landmark case overturning nearly 50 years of precedent. The latest example of the conservative majority redefining American law, including abortion rights and guns. The ruling means higher education institutions will need to come up with new ways to create diverse student bodies. Groups of protesters, mostly made up of young adults, gathered outside the court to voice their outrage. And to underscore how monumental this case is, 6 of the 9 justices wrote opinions, many personal and strongly worded. CBS's Major Garrett has all the new details and will start us off tonight from outside the Supreme Court. Good evening, Major.
Good evening, Nora. Yes, it was personal, with justices on the touchstone issue of race talking to and past one another. This sweeping and historic ruling effectively ends affirmative action in college admissions, reversing decades of precedent that less conservative court majorities had protected and giving colleges and universities some latitude to consider race as one factor as they sought to build more diverse student bodies. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said admission policies at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race, Roberts wrote. Many universities have for too long done just the opposite. In a scathing dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor accused the court majority of ignoring history and precedent. The court cements a superficial rule of colorblindness as a constitutional principle in an endemically segregated society where race has always mattered and continues to matter. At the White House, President Biden criticized the conservative majority.
This is not a normal court.
And said the nation must find a new way to achieve diversity in college admissions.
What I propose for consideration is a new standard, where colleges take into account the adversity a student has overcome when selecting among qualified applicants.
The opinion also exposed deep personal and ideological divisions within the court. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to serve on the High Court, wrote in her dissent, quote, "With let them eat cake obliviousness, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces color blindness for all by legal fiat." Clarence Thomas, the court's other black justice, responded, quote, "Justice Jackson uses her broad observations about statistical relationships between race and select measures of health, wealth, and well-being to label all blacks as victims."
We won't go back!
Outside the court, students and civil rights leaders assembled to protest.
I think in this moment in time, it's important for every institution, from colleges to corporations, to commit to pledge to diversity no matter what.
Ed Bloom, the president of Students for Fair Admissions, brought the case to the court, arguing race should not factor into admissions decisions at all.
Ending racial preferences in college admissions is an outcome that the vast majority of all Americans of all races will celebrate.
CBS News polling shows that 70% of Americans think race should not be allowed as a factor in college admissions. But statistics indicate that in states that have banned affirmative action, such as California and Michigan, admissions for Black and Latino students have fallen dramatically at their most selective universities. Shruti Kumar, a student at Harvard, opposes today's court ruling.
I think the idea that our society can be colorblind is a silly one. We don't live in a perfect meritocracy.
The decision was praised by most Republican primary contenders, chief among them former President Trump, who took credit for appointing 3 of the justices in today's conservative majority. Former First Lady Michelle Obama said she had benefited greatly from affirmative action and vowed to continue her work to build more minority inclusion in higher education. Nora?
Major Garrett on this landmark case. Thank you.
We come on the air with breaking news from the Supreme Court at this hour. The justice is deciding on a pair of cases for sweeping implications here for the First Amendment, anti-discrimination laws, as well as student debt. And the court has just ruled now on the first of those cases. It features the owner of a Colorado web design company who did not want to create wedding websites for same-sex couples, and the court has held that that website designer does not have to, that free speech is her right, and that Colorado's anti-discrimination law cannot force her to do this website for same-sex couples if she does not want to. So let's go right to NBC's Laura Jarrett, who's reading this decision along with me. Here we go again. So here's a case where the Supreme Court has reversed the lower courts and said this wedding website designer cannot be forced to provide this service, web design, in contrast to something that she believes, which in her case is that same-sex marriage is not valid.
A major decision for states across the country that have anti-discrimination laws like Colorado, trying to enforce them. But in this case, the High Court, in a divided ruling, has ruled in favor of Lorie Smith, that graphic designer who, as you mentioned, says that she wants to make wedding websites, but she hasn't actually made any thus far. But she says she fears being fined under Colorado's law, which applies to all public accommodations, which says as long as you're holding your business out to the public, you have to treat everybody equally, which means you can't discriminate on the basis of someone's sexual orientation. And in this case, they say that violates her right to free speech. Now, she has said in interviews that she's actually happy to make other types of websites for gay individuals. So it's not just that she doesn't want to discriminate, but she says in particular when it comes to marriage, that's something that she opposes. Now, of course, this is a court that has largely ruled in favor of those who have made religious freedom type of arguments before. But we should note this is a different type of case. This is on First Amendment grounds. And so it doesn't depend on the fact that she has a religious objection to it. She could have actually objected to it for any reason, as long as it's about her free speech. Now, one of the things we're going to be looking for as we dissect this opinion is where is the line? How does the court decide that she, as an artist, has that right? But what about a florist? What about a wedding caterer? Those are typically businesses, again, open to the public that cannot discriminate. And one of the things that certain liberals on the court brought up at oral argument was how are you supposed to handle a situation in which somebody decides they don't want to serve an interracial couple? In other words, discriminating on the basis of race. Everyone kind of gets their arms around that situation and can say that doesn't seem like that would pass muster under the Constitution. But in this case, how is it different? How is it different in the case of somebody who wants to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation versus race? That's one of the things that we're now going to be looking for. But the major headline here is that the High Court has ruled in her favor, and now we'll see what happens next.
And we have this 6 conservatives, ideological conservatives on the bench in the majority here. The opinion is written by Justice Gorsuch. In dissent, once again, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. And Justice Sotomayor in dissent says, today the court, for the first time in its history, grants a business open to the public a constitutional right to refuse to serve members of a protected class. I mean, this goes back to what you were just talking about, Laura, which was how you viewed this case. The question presented was whether or not a wedding website was an act of free speech, in which case you can't compel someone to say something they don't agree with, or was it kind of an off-the-shelf product, like a pair of shoes or something that you could buy, and if you put those for sale, you have to sell them to everyone under public accommodation laws. And the court is clearly saying this is an exercise of free speech, and this wedding website designer cannot be forced to put out a message she does not agree with.
And there was a lot of debate about whose speech is it, right? A lot of the members of the court, particularly Justice Sotomayor, said, wait a minute, isn't it the couple's free speech? Isn't she actually just doing whatever the couple want? And clearly Justice Gorsuch, on behalf of the majority, is saying no. When she makes that website, it's actually her free speech. It's her creative, unique art that she's putting out into the world, not the couple's. And I think that's going to be a meaningful, distinguishing factor here as we think about, again, how is the court drawing these lines? How is the court going to sort of figure out where the rules of the road are for other businesses that may not want to serve gay couples?
The U.S. Supreme Court shoots down a plan to forgive student loan debt. KTV's James Torres shows us the reaction and breaks down the decision.
The Supreme Court heard two separate cases challenging President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. Out of a total of 8 plaintiffs, justices ruled only one, the state of Missouri, had standing to challenge the program.
The Missouri case, the case of the states, also should have been dismissed.
UC Law San Francisco professor David Levine calls the ruling a stretch. It stemmed off a Missouri nonprofit loan collection agency named Mohila. The state argued the lack of payments could hurt the organization's ability to function.
What's odd is normally a separate entity has to sue on its own behalf, and this state organization, Mohila, didn't want to join the suit.
The Biden administration argued it had the authority to forgive loans up to $20,000 per eligible candidate under the HEROES Act. They say that allows them to make those changes under a national emergency like the COVID-19 pandemic. The plan would have accounted for more than $400 billion in relief.
I don't feel surprised because it was also something that I didn't really think was actually going to follow through. I don't know why. Maybe it's me being negative, but I just never thought that it would actually go through.
Ultimately, it didn't go through. Justice John Roberts wrote in the court's opinion, 6 states sued, arguing the HEROES Act does not authorize the loan cancellation plan. We agree.
What Chief Justice Roberts for the 6 justices says is, well, that doesn't include cancellation. That's a step too far. And if it had simply been modifications or waivers, okay.
President Biden reacting to the ruling, saying, in part, the hypocrisy of Republican elected officials is stunning. They had no problem with billions in pandemic-related loans to businesses, including hundreds of thousands and in some cases millions of dollars for their own businesses. And those loans were forgiven. But when it came to providing relief to millions of hardworking Americans, they did everything in their power to stop it. Republican lawmakers like House Speaker Kevin McCarthy spoke in favor of the ruling, saying President Biden's student loan giveaway is ruled unlawful. The 87% of Americans without student loans are no longer forced to pay for the 13% who do. Professor Levine says the Biden administration's promise to forgive some student loan debt might only happen through introducing and passing a bill through Congress.
Tonight, a new fight. President Biden firing back at the Supreme Court.
We cannot let this decision be the last word.
Emphatic that discrimination still exists. And when asked if the justices are a rogue court, the president with this striking attack on the conservative majority.
This is not a normal court.
Going even further on MSNBC.
Find it just so out of sorts with the basic value system of the American people.
The vice president in New Orleans today.
It is about being blind to history, being blind to data, being blind to empirical evidence about disparities.
A majority of Americans, 53%, say affirmative action programs without quotas are still needed, according to an April NBC News poll. But the Republican 2024 class says the high court got it right by removing racial preferences. GOP frontrunner former President Trump writing, "This is a great day for America. We're going back to all merit-based, and that's the way it should be." And this praise from Senator Tim Scott.
This is the day where we understand that being judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin, is what our Constitution wants.
Today in Ukraine, NBC's Dasha Burns with Mike Pence.
The Supreme Court just struck down affirmative action. What is your reaction?
There may have been a time 50 years ago when we needed to affirmatively take steps to correct long-term racial bias in institutions of higher education. Those days are long over.
The Biden administration says it's been working for months to prepare new guidance for schools to navigate this changed admissions landscape.
So this is all done by design, right? This is as deliberate as it gets. Let's start and let's take a look at the affirmative action thing, right? The Supreme Court affirmative action out of college admissions programs, it did not allow the goal of achieving diversity, but it set a new race-neutral standard, which is the way that it should be run. I mean, it's ridiculous what they, this whole, the affirmative action, right? These are just methods they use psychologically to convince people, whether they're convincing them they're victims or convincing them that they deserve something because they're victims, or convincing other people that they're bad people because of their certain skin color. It's just all them messing with people, psychologically messing with people. So the term race neutral does not appear in the opinion of the court, written by Chief Justice John Roberts, which states that colleges and universities have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of the individual's identity is not challenge-based skills, challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. So then, of course, we get Biden and Trump commentating on it, right? Well, why wouldn't they commentate on it? Why wouldn't Biden tell us that this is a corrupt, sick Supreme Court, and then Trump say this is great, right? As they continue to put the divide, and I'm telling you, this is going to end up being two different countries. It's going to be like Ireland. That's exactly what the blueprint is. This is going to happen in a lot of countries. The people who go into the blue states who think that they're free and we're progressive, they're going to be guinea pigs. They're going to be guinea pigs for the mark. They're going to be guinea pigs for all these experiments to be done on them. They're going to be guinea pigs for the smart cities because the rest of society is not going to go along with it. They're awake to it, a lot of people. Now, some might fall into the tech trap because they're, obviously conservatives are dependent on their phones, et cetera. But they're going to divide us. There's going to be different rules in different states. This is how they're doing it. This is how they're getting people on board. You're not going to be able to get abortions in these states. Gays aren't going to have rights in these. They're going to persuade you into these states. What they could do is run amok. They could have naked pride parades, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the people, they're making it so that conservatives don't want to be around these people because they're giving them so much freedom. But those people who are getting the freedoms think that they're being oppressed, right? The pride parades have turned into nude parades now, but they're oppressed. Every company is promoting their agenda, but they're oppressed. They actually believe this because they don't have thoughts in their heads, right? And they're always victims. It's part of narcissistic disorder. The other side is getting to the point where they don't want to be around them. And I think we all could agree we don't really want to be around these people, unfortunately, because they've turned them into absolute menaces to society. There's no morals anymore, right? So they're letting them push the extreme as far as they could push it, getting into libraries, getting into schools, wanting to be able to castrate, all this stuff done by design to create this division. But this is Biden and Trump, the whole thing is them working their audiences, the liberal base and the Republican base. Oh, the Supreme Court's corrupt. It's got to go. We got to destroy it. Take it down now, right? Because of the people who are in there. They're destroying our democracy, right? It's all a charade. It's a show being put on by these people in power. They have to destroy the system that is in place. They cannot bring about the New World Order with the system that is in place in America and in these other countries. That's why they're promoting these things that used to be on C-SPAN, these arguments in the House and the Senate that nobody would ever watch. They're not only promoting them, they're putting all of these characters from the Senate and the House. Instead of putting on the late night talk shows like Johnny Carson would have, Burt Reynolds on and Rodney Dangerfield on. You put on these late night shows, there's senators on there. You're like, oh, tonight, the senator from Iowa. You'd be like, what? I don't want to watch it, but people are watching it. Not a lot, but people are. This is what they're getting programmed with. Instead of like, oh, here's your new movie, crack some fake jokes about your family. Oh, did I tell you about the family trip I went on? That's what the late shows used to be. Obviously fake and formulated, but that's what it used to be. Now, they're turning these people into celebrities. They're turning the debates in Congress into national news because they want to continue to work people's minds psychologically into this national divorce. It's all done by design. The people in power, Republican and Democrat, are working together to do this. The Republicans, if they wanted what we all would want, right, they go out there and they say it, but they don't do anything. And then they come out and they go, well, the reason that things aren't happening with Hunter Biden, which is all PSYOP, the reason that things aren't happening is because there's a two-tier system of justice. So we should all want to get separated from them. And then we'll lead you, these Republican leaders will lead you in the red states, and you can cheer for us. And it's all part of a plan. It is all part of a plan. They're working together. All of them on both sides should be thrown out. None of them were voted in. Okay? You see how famous these alt-right ones, they call them extremists, like Lauren Boebert and the other guy from Florida, Matt, whatever. I can't even think of his name off the top of my head. They're like household names on every talk show, right? And you're just like, who cares? And then you're like, okay, well, if these people are elected, shouldn't they be doing stuff? Like you look at Watergate, you look at Bill Clinton's scandal. The stuff with Biden would be 1,000 times worse. Giving land to China and all this stuff, money from China, our opposition, the communist dictatorship of China, right? They'd be impeached, he'd be gone. But they're like, well, we're trying, but we can't do it. They just constantly talk, and they work people up into a frenzy. Done by design. Both sides working together. And now they're working together to destroy the system itself. And they want it destroyed for the 2024 elections if they happen. And again, I covered the Zelensky thing this week about how they're not even going to have elections. They're postponing because of war. So keep an eye on that narrative as well. But this is all done by design. How convenient. Things that people aren't even asking for. Look, obviously we all, with the Roe v. Wade, we all agree. But why are they doing it? They don't cater to us. They're doing it because they're causing division. They're riling up both sides. It is so obvious what's going on. It's amazing people don't see it. But they're not smart enough to. I thank you guys for being here. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you can see what's going on. God bless all of you and your families.